Hello and welcome to Temporal, part of the podcast series with Ahval News Online. Our subject today is the developing story on energy lines and efforts on political and technical levels on the Eastern Mediterranean. As reported recently by Ahval and Reuters, Eastern Mediterranean countries, some of them, agreed on January 14 to establish an organization to coordinate the efforts to transform the basin, the region, into a gas hub. And these efforts, though, leaves out two key regional states. Those who joined are Egypt, Cyprus, Greece, Israel, Italy, Jordan, and the Palestinians. And they met in Cairo recently to set up an Eastern Mediterranean gas forum to build the regional gas market, to cut costs, and to offer competitive pricing, as the report said. Turkey and Lebanon, they were left out of the meeting, although both began their own exploratory drillings in the Eastern Mediterranean last year. Both countries claim to Eastern Mediterranean waters have been disputed, Turkey by way of Cyprus and Lebanon by Israel. And just to summarize, the new organization, as far as we know, will be based in Cairo, and it will aim to create a regional gas market that serves the interests of its members by ensuring supply and demand, optimizing resource development, rationalizing the cost of infrastructure, offering competitive prices, and improving trade relations. And this is the statement of the Egyptian Petroleum Ministry. And to shed light on what is really happening and get an expert view, our guest today is Tzimitras, Director of PRIO Cyprus Centre. PRIO, short version of Peace Research Institute, Oslo. Tzimitras is a professor of international law and international relations. Before joining PRIO, he was in Istanbul's Bilgi University, where he has been the director of International Relations Program and director of the Turkish-Greek Studies Division. In Istanbul, he was a adjunct professor also of international law at Koç University. Educated at the London School of Economics and the Pantheon University of Athens, Tzimitras has held positions at the University of Cambridge and the Institute of International Relations, Athens. His teachings, research, and policy interests lie primarily in the fields of public international law, energy geopolitics, foreign policy, the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey. In short, an expert on the very subject that we are going to discuss today. Welcome to Temporal, Mr. Tzimitras.
Very good to be with you.
Please walk us through about this development, the constellation as it is, and what the objectives are, and how to read into this one.
You know, I think this is still in the making, and I think this is not the end, but rather than the beginning of the process. Bear in mind that energy was discovered first in the Eastern Mediterranean around 2010, with Israel being successful at that time. Then some very small findings in the EEZ of the Republic of Cyprus. Later, a little bit around in Lebanon recently, and so on and so forth. But this is still in terms of the grand scheme, if you like, or in the history of hydrocarbons, very much in the beginning. Sometimes when we have this discussion in this part of the world, people believe that every time governments meet to sign an agreement of some definition, tomorrow the exploration will start. And this is not the case. This is why I'm saying that this is the beginning, in the sense that now that we have some concerted findings in the region, regional governments find it interesting and perhaps important even for them to come together and decide what their stance will be if the findings will be of that magnitude that will allow exploration and exploitation. And I would like to underline this if, because still we're very much in the beginning of the process. Some countries are more advanced, like Israel and Egypt, of course. Others are still lagging behind. This does not mean that there won't necessarily be anything, but this is very, very much in the beginning of the discussion. So let's not believe that we have things in place, gas is in place that can be explored immediately. I think the decisions on the part of states are political for the time being, in the sense that market and technical and economic realities are not necessarily the ones that make it to the public dialogue. So I think that it's important that countries come together and decide to cooperate, but this does not mean that we have reached the stage of this being implemented in the practical terms.
Given the immense turbulence, uncertainties, and unpredictabilities in the region, in the Middle East and Eastern, that also reflects on Eastern Mediterranean, is this overall a realistic project, militarily, politically, technically?
Look, it really depends on a number of factors, and this is changing by the day. It's a very dynamic terrain, oil and gas. Nobody thought that we would have reached a stage where the prices of oil would be what they are today. Nobody thought that the geopolitical changes that take place in the whole region would be what they are. And certainly we shouldn't make predictions about the future that are not realistic. For instance, if the starting point is that we need to diversify the energy resources that will supply Europe, then I think we're in a very long way from application, in the sense that Europe is flooded with gas at the moment and at prices that are extremely competitive, and also with Russia, that has been a good provider to Europe, is able to play with the prices. And so I don't necessarily think that if the logic is to diversify resources for Europe's supply, that this is viable for the time being. But of course, on the other hand, if we understand this in a global context, where East Mediterranean resources would come into play on a global scale, perhaps addressing the needs of Southeast Asia, where demand is very high, then possibly we have something in place. But this will be demanded and determined by the markets. It's not the governments that buy or sell gas. It is private companies, and the only thing that governments can do is facilitate this process, provide frameworks for cooperation. But let's not be wrong about this. It is neither states nor in organizations like the European Union that buy and sell these commodities. It's private companies with that have profit as the goal, and obviously they will act only if the market conditions are favorable to that. Political cooperation is important, synergies are important, but at the end of the day, it is the markets that will determine to what extent these findings will be utilized, if they will, when, and at what price.
Volume-wise, how much of the resources are we talking about? Is there an assessment, a rough assessment of what lies underneath?
Every day we have new findings. Egypt is way ahead compared to everyone else. Egypt has become this year self-sufficient, and bear in mind that Egypt is a huge market, internal market, I mean, and now it will possibly start exporting as of this year or next year. Israel is also at a position to export smaller amounts, and possibly in the first instance to Egypt, to cover some very temporary needs of the country. In the case of Cyprus, the findings are very small in and by themselves as they stand at the moment, and notwithstanding ExxonMobil's drilling, which takes place as we speak. But as they stand for the time being, they cannot sustain a mode of extraction in and by themselves. They need to be tapped with other bigger findings, perhaps in Israel or in Egypt. That's why I'm saying that it is a little bit premature at the moment to talk about marketability of those. It's important that they exist. It's important that we found them. It's important that they pave the way towards cooperation with other states in the region. But we are far from utilization and exploitation at the moment.
The very constellation of the countries that form the forum inevitably bring the question: why were Turkey and Lebanon left out, and what was the main reason for that? How should we read into this?
So, as things stand, countries that have formed what is called tripartites or quadripartites agreements until now, namely, more particularly, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, Greece, Cyprus, the Palestinian Authority, sometimes in Jordan, have done so in their will to somehow, exactly because the quantities are not that big, to come together and promote a market for them. Of course, between Cyprus or the Republic of Cyprus and Turkey, there is a standing conflict, so they cannot cooperate as things stand. Although it could perhaps be one of the ways that could pave the way towards further cooperation. Lebanon is a very much a newcomer, in the sense that the findings, small as they might be, but still interesting, it just came about. So I think Lebanon was not part of this big call for very technical reasons, because it lagged behind. Of course, there is the rift with Israel in place. Let me put it differently. I'm not quite sure if these are designed to exclude Turkey and Lebanon. If they are designed to do so, then I think they run a very high risk of failure. But if it is just an exclusion at the moment because the conditions are not favorable, and then in principle both countries would be included as soon as the conditions are favorable, then I think there is a more of a viability prospect in this. And I think it is even the president of the Republic of Cyprus has explicitly mentioned that he's not against cooperation with Turkey as soon as conditions become favorable, which is a positive sign. When would the conditions become favorable? It's a bigger political question, of course, that taps into the existence of the Cyprus issue and all that. But it's good that at least we have a assurance that this is not in principle against them, at least in the way that politicians present it.
What happens if Turkey, for this or that reason, refuses to take part in this constellation? Do you foresee any further tension?
So, unfortunately, oil and gas all around the world, before it becomes a blessing, has many times become a curse. So, in a sense, rather than using oil and gas as a platform for reconciliation, paving the way towards more cooperation in other fields and between states, sometimes it fuels an existing conflict. And this, I'm afraid, has been the case, at least in Cyprus, where oil and gas became, to put it in a more literal way, a chapter in the existing book of conflict, or a new link, if you like, in the existing chain of the conflict. I think we might have missed an opportunity to use this as a platform for reconciliation, a win-win. Turkey espouses claims not only by itself regarding what Turkey presumes to be its own rights in sea areas, but also it does so espousing claims of the Turkish Cypriot community. And so to this extent, Turkey is projecting two different, if you like, sets of claims. As things move forward with new explorations, we're going to see to what extent the Turkish Cypriot community is going to be included somehow in the process. And that, I think, will unlock the potential of solving one of the two pending issues. Of course, there are elections coming up, both in the Turkish Cypriot community and European elections. I think there will be pressures for movement on this, but this is inextricably linked to the progress of the Cyprus issue. And I think Turkey will decide on its position depending on the international progress of the Cyprus issue, and also regarding the further exploration activities that might be pursued. If ExxonMobil is not very successful in the coming months, then possibly this whole business will be put to a halt until further notice.
I see. So, in short, the inclusion of the Northern Cypriot Turkish Turk-Cypriot community could be a game changer in that context.
It could be, and it could be, I think, very favorably seen by the international community, the United Nations, the European Union, other states that would understand it as a commitment on the part of all Cypriots to move forward using energy as a platform for cooperation.
Today, we spoke about Mediterranean Gas Forum, Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, with the participation of Egypt, Cyprus, Greece, Israel, Italy. also including the Palestinians. They met in Cairo. And we tried to shed light on the subject, what it means, with Harry Tzimitras, director of PRIO Cyprus Centre. Thank you very much for this conversation, Mr. Tzimitras.
Thank you.